Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the heart of the mystical African city of Kisa, a young man named Kofi discovers he is the key to unlocking an ancient, powerful flame buried beneath the city. The flame holds the power to either protect or destroy Kisa, and Kofi must face overwhelming darkness, twisted shadows, and his deepest fears to save his home. As he battles mysterious forces, Kofi learns that only through unity, love, and hope can he truly control the flame. But with each victory, the threat of a greater evil looms, one that could consume everything he holds dear. Will Kofi rise as the protector of Kisa, or will the darkness devour the city? The city of Kisa had always seemed ordinary, its vibrant markets and busy streets bustling with life. But beneath the surface, there was something that whispered through the shadows, something ancient. Kofi, a 19-year-old apprentice at his uncle's small electronics shop, had never been the type to believe in superstitions. Until that night. It was a humid evening, the air heavy with the scent of rain, when Kofi took a shortcut home through a narrow alley that twisted behind the old market. He had passed by the ancient stone statue of a lion 100 times, but tonight, something was different. The lion's eyes, usually dark and lifeless, flickered with an eerie, blue flame. Kofi froze, his breath catching in his throat. His mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. "It's just a trick of the light," he muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. But as he stepped closer, the flames in the lion's eyes grew brighter, casting strange shadows across the walls of the alley. And then, as if summoned by some unseen force, the ground beneath Kofi trembled. The stone lion's mouth slowly creaked open, revealing a passageway that had never been there before. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct told him to turn and run, but curiosity tugged at him harder. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, drawn into the darkness. The air was cool inside the passage, thick with the scent of earth and something else, something metallic, like rusted iron. The farther he walked, the stranger the world around him became. Strange symbols, etched into the walls, pulsed with a faint glow, as if they were alive. The tunnel curved, leading him deeper beneath the city. And then, up ahead, he saw it, a flickering light. Kofi cautiously approached. At the end of the passage was a massive underground chamber, lit by a single, strange flame hovering above a stone altar. The flame danced in the air, casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. Kofi felt his stomach churn. On the altar lay a scroll, rolled tightly and sealed with an emblem, a serpent wrapped around a flame. Kofi's hand trembled as he reached for it. But just as his fingers brushed the seal, a voice boomed from the darkness. "You dare touch what you do not understand." Kofi spun around, his heart in his throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, its face obscured. The only thing visible were its eyes, burning with the same blue flame as the lion's statue. "Who are you?" Kofi asked, his voice shaking. "What is this place?" The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the air around Kofi grew heavy, suffocating. "This," the figure said, its voice low and menacing, "is the place where the truth has been buried. The city of Kisa is built on secrets that those in power have tried to hide for centuries. But now, you've found it." Kofi's legs felt like lead. "I didn't mean to." "Your intentions do not matter," the figure interrupted. You have already crossed into the world beneath. There is no turning back now. Before Kofi could react, the chamber began to tremble. The symbols on the walls flared with light, and the air grew thick with whispers, thousands of voices, all speaking at once. The ground cracked, and from the fissure, something began to emerge. Not a creature, but a presence. It was dark, formless, and it reeked of power. The figure in the cloak knelt before it, whispering in a language Kofi couldn't understand. But whatever it was, Kofi knew one thing: it was waking up. And Kofi, somehow, had been the key to unlocking it. The darkness swirled around Kofi, pulling at him like a vortex. His body trembled, as if something was trying to crawl beneath his skin. The figure in the cloak stood, eyes glowing brighter than before. You, the figure said, were chosen long before you stepped into this place. The flame marked you, even though you didn't see it. Kofi's heart raced. His mind was spinning. What did the figure mean? How could he, a simple boy from the streets of Kisa, be chosen for anything? I don't understand. Chosen for what? To uncover the truth, the figure said, walking closer. But with truth comes a cost. Before Kofi could ask more, the shadows surged around him, cold and suffocating. He gasped, his vision blurring. For a moment, he felt like he was floating, weightless, disconnected from the world. And then, pain shot through his arm. He looked down and saw it, etched into his skin, glowing with the same blue light as the flame, a mark, like a serpent coiled around his wrist. Panic surged through him. What is this? What have you done to me? The figure's smile was hidden, but Kofi could feel it in the air, chilling. You've been given the mark of the flame. It will guide you, but it will also consume you, if you let it. Kofi stumbled back, his mind screaming at him to escape. But the chamber was changing. The walls were shifting, the symbols pulsing faster, and the dark presence was growing stronger. The city above will soon feel what lies beneath, the figure whispered. And you are the only one who can stop it. Kofi felt a wave of fear crash over him. Stop it. How could he stop anything? He was just an ordinary boy. But before he could argue, the chamber shook violently. The ground beneath him gave way, and Kofi fell, plunging into darkness. Kofi gasped for air as he tumbled through the abyss, the shadows wrapping around him like chains. He had no sense of time or direction, only the cold, creeping dread that grew with every passing second. When he finally landed, he found himself in a place that shouldn't have existed. It was another chamber, but this one was different. The walls were carved with images, ancient, terrifying depictions of creatures and rituals that made Kofi's stomach turn. And in the center of the room stood a massive stone pillar, covered in the same glowing symbols. But what truly horrified him was the fact that the city of Kisa was visible through cracks in the ceiling above. He was beneath it, deep in the underworld of the city, and it was about to come alive in ways he couldn't imagine. Kofi stood frozen in the eerie chamber, the light from the flickering blue flames casting long shadows across the walls. The city of Kisa, visible through the cracks above, seemed peaceful for now, but something was stirring. A deep rumble resonated beneath the stone floors, as though the earth itself was awakening. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and Kofi could feel something behind him. Slowly, he turned, his breath caught in his throat. From the stone pillar in the center of the chamber, a dark mist began to rise, swirling like a living cloud. Within it, Kofi could make out twisted shapes, figures, faces, their expressions contorted in agony. A voice echoed through the chamber, low and insidious. You've opened the door, Kofi. Now the shadows will feed. Before he could react, the mist shot forward, wrapping around him like icy tendrils. Kofi tried to scream, but the sound was choked by the darkness that gripped him. It wasn't just cold, it was alive, writhing against his skin, whispering in his ear. You must pay the price, the voice hissed. The city will know suffering. Just then, a violent tremor shook the chamber when Kofi was thrown to the ground. He gasped for air as the mist released him, but he knew something had changed. The crack above him widened, and through it, he saw the city begin to change. The blue flame that had marked him was now rising through the streets of Kisa, flickering through the cracks in the ground like veins of light. As Kofi scrambled to his feet, he realized what was happening. The ancient power he had awakened wasn't just beneath the city. It was spreading, infecting the world above. And then, through the cracks, he saw the people of Kisa. The mist had reached them too. They were no longer moving normally. Their faces twisted into grotesque expressions of fear, their bodies contorted as they stumbled through the streets, eyes glowing faintly with the same blue light. Kofi's stomach churned. Whatever he had unleashed, it was taking control of the city. A deep, menacing voice spoke from behind him once again, causing his blood to freeze. The flame has chosen its path. You cannot stop it. Kofi spun around, but there was no one there, just the shadows, twisting and shifting in the flickering light. His mind raced. The mark on his arm pulsed painfully, glowing brighter. Somehow, it was connected to all of this. Somehow, he was the key. But before he could think further, a new sound reached his ears, a scream echoing through the cracks above. And then another. And another. The city was descending into chaos, and Kofi knew he had to act before it was too late. Kofi scrambled out of the chamber, his legs shaking as he raced through the underground tunnels, desperate to find a way out. Every corner he turned, the strange symbols on the walls seemed to grow brighter, casting eerie shadows that followed him. The farther he went, the louder the screams from the city became. Finally, he emerged into the open air, stumbling into a narrow alleyway. The city was in chaos. People ran through the streets, their eyes glowing faintly, and the blue mist that had emerged from the ground swirled around them. It was like the city had been swallowed by a living nightmare. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted towards his uncle's shop, hoping for some sense of normalcy, some refuge. But when he arrived, the door was wide open, the windows shattered. Inside, the electronics hummed with unnatural energy, sparking with blue flames. "Kofi!" The voice startled him. He turned sharply to see the cloaked figure from the underground chamber standing in the shadows of the shop. His heart raced, but there was no escaping this presence. "What is happening?" Kofi demanded, his voice shaky. "Why is this happening to the city?" The figure stepped forward, the blue flames reflecting in their eyes. "You've opened the door to the flame. It has chosen its host, and now the power must feed." "Feed on what?" Kofi asked, his voice rising with fear. "These people, they are suffering." The figure's eyes gleamed. "The flame requires a sacrifice. You've seen what it can do. It will consume the weak, those who stand in its path. But you can control it if you are strong enough." Kofi took a step back. "I don't want this. I didn't ask for any of this." The figure's lips curled into a faint smile. "You were chosen, Kofi. The mark on your arm, it's a gift. But gifts come with responsibilities." Before Kofi could respond, a loud crack echoed through the streets. He looked up to see one of the tallest buildings in Kisa collapsing in on itself, crumbling like sand as the blue mist consumed it. Kofi's blood ran cold. The city was falling apart, and the flame was growing stronger. He had to find a way to stop it before it consumed everything. But the figure's next words stopped him in his tracks. "There is a way to end this," the cloaked one said, stepping closer. "But it requires something significant. A choice that only you can make." Kofi swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the destruction around him and the figure's glowing eyes. "What kind of choice?" The figure's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it, only darkness. "To give the flame what it truly desires. And in return, you will have the power to control it. Kofi felt the mark on his arm burn hotter, as if it were alive, pulsing with dark energy. He didn't know what the figure meant, but one thing was clear: whatever choice lay ahead, it would change his life, and the fate of Kisa, forever. The streets of Kisa were unrecognizable. Buildings crumbled under the weight of the blue mist, and the people, once vibrant and full of life, moved like shadows, hollow, their glowing eyes searching for something they could not name. The flame had taken hold of the city. Kofi's mind raced. The cloaked figure's words echoed in his head: give the flame what it desires. But what did it desire? What could he possibly offer that would satisfy the power now tearing his city apart? The mark on his arm burned fiercely, and Kofi gritted his teeth. He could feel the flame's pull, like it was alive within him. It whispered to him, filling his mind with thoughts that weren't his own. You can control it, the voice inside him hissed. You just have to give in. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. No, he whispered. I'm not going to let it control me. But the flame wasn't listening. The blue mist swirled around him, and as it did, he saw something horrifying. The people of Kisa, the ones affected by the mist, they weren't just glowing. They were changing. Their skin shimmered with a faint blue light, and their faces twisted in unnatural ways, as if the flame had begun to reshape them. Kofi could hardly breathe as he watched the city around him transform into something dark and grotesque. The blue mist was everywhere now, seeping through cracks in the earth, engulfing buildings, and twisting the once peaceful streets into a nightmarish landscape. The people, his friends, his neighbors, were no longer themselves. Their bodies twitched and convulsed as if under some sinister spell, and their eyes glowed with the eerie blue light of the flame. The mist swirled more violently around Kofi, tightening its grip, as if pulling him toward something. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest, but he couldn't escape. The flame's voice whispered in his mind, growing louder with each passing moment. Give in, Kofi. Surrender to the flame. But then, a piercing scream echoed from down the street, cutting through the oppressive silence. Kofi spun around and saw a young girl, no older than 10, standing alone in the mist. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her small body trembled as the blue light flickered in her gaze. The mist was wrapping itself around her like a snake, tightening, pulling her toward the growing fire at the center of the city. Without thinking, Kofi rushed forward. His instincts screamed at him to run, but something inside him, perhaps the last shred of his humanity, pushed him toward the girl. He reached out, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her away from the encroaching mist. But the mist didn't let go. It lashed out at him, searing his skin with cold fire, and the mark on his arm blazed in response. Kofi cried out in pain, but he refused to release the girl. Suddenly, the mist recoiled as if it had been burned. The blue flames in the distance flickered, and for a brief moment, Kofi thought he saw something, a figure wrapped in shadows, watching him from within the fire. Its eyes glowed with the same unnatural light, and its smile was twisted, malevolent. The voice returned, louder now, echoing through his mind. The flame requires a sacrifice, Kofi. It's time to choose. Before Kofi could react, the ground beneath them rumbled violently. Cracks appeared in the streets, and the mist poured out like smoke from a cauldron. From the depths of the earth, the blue flame surged upward, forming a towering pillar of fire in the heart of Kisa. It cast an ominous light over the city, illuminating the destruction that had already begun to spread. But the flame wasn't just consuming the city, it was searching for something or someone. Kofi held the girl close as he backed away from the growing inferno. His thoughts raced, desperate for a way out. The words of the cloaked figure echoed in his ears, you can control it, but only if you give it what it desires. The mist hissed, coiling around him once more, and in that moment, Kofi understood. The flame didn't just want chaos. It wanted control of him, of the city, of everything. And it would stop at nothing until it got what it craved. The sky over Kisa had turned a deep, unnatural blue, as if the very heavens had been poisoned by the rising flame. The people were no longer recognizable, twisted into grotesque versions of themselves, consumed by the power of the mist. And now, Kofi stood at the heart of it all, clutching the terrified girl as the flame's voice filled his mind. "You must choose," the voice whispered, a low, insidious hiss. "The flame demands a sacrifice." Kofi's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at the girl, trembling in his arms, her eyes flickering with the faint blue light of the mist. Could he really make such a choice? Could he condemn her, or anyone, to this dark fate? Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled again, more violently this time. Kofi looked up just in time to see the pillar of blue flame at the center of the city begin to writhe and twist, as if something inside it was alive. The mist swirled around it, gathering like a storm, and the shadows that danced within the fire seemed to grow darker and more menacing. Kofi knew he didn't have much time. He set the girl down gently, his mind racing. "Stay here," he whispered, though he wasn't sure why. The mist was everywhere, and there was nowhere safe anymore. But as he turned to leave, the girl grabbed his hand, her small fingers trembling. "Don't go," she pleaded, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flame. Kofi froze. He couldn't abandon her. Not after everything that had happened. Suddenly, the mist shifted around them, and from its depths emerged a figure, cloaked in shadow, with eyes that burned blue fire. The figure moved silently, as if floating above the ground, its gaze locked on Kofi. "The time has come," the figure said, its voice cold and unfeeling. "The flame must feed." Kofi stepped back, instinctively shielding the girl behind him. "I won't let you take her." The figure's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You misunderstand, Kofi. It is not the girl the flame desires." Kofi's breath caught in his throat. The mark on his arm burned hotter than ever, and he suddenly realized what the figure meant. The flame wasn't after the girl, it was after him. "The mark has chosen you," the figure continued, its voice growing darker. "You are the one the flame seeks. And you will give it what it desires." Kofi shook his head, his pulse racing. "No. I won't let it control me." The figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You already belong to the flame, Kofi. You have since the moment you touched the map. The only choice left is how you will use the power you've been given." The blue mist coiled around Kofi's legs, cold and suffocating, but he refused to give in. He could feel the flame's pull, the way it tugged at his mind, at his soul, but he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Kofi felt the weight of the mist pressing down on him, thick and heavy like a shroud. The figure's words echoed in his ears, each syllable laced with dark power. The city of Kisa trembled beneath the growing flame, and Kofi knew that if he didn't act soon, there would be nothing left. But what choice did he have? If he surrendered to the flame, the power could destroy everything. But if he resisted, the flame would consume the city anyway, turning everything he loved into ash. The figure stepped closer, its eyes burning with the same blue fire that now consumed the city. "You cannot run from your destiny, Kofi. The flame is in you now. You have the power to control it, but you must pay the price." Kofi's hand trembled as he reached for the mark on his arm. The burning sensation had intensified, spreading through his entire body. He could feel the flame inside him, twisting and writhing, demanding to be set free. But he wasn't ready to give in. With a sudden burst of energy, Kofi lunged forward, pushing past the figure and running toward the city center. The mist followed him, swirling like a living creature, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Kofi sprinted through the desolate streets of Kisa, his feet pounding against the cracked pavement. Behind him, the mist swirled like a predator, hungry, relentless. The blue flame in the distance pulsed, casting eerie shadows across the ruined city, like the beat of a dark heart pumping life into something monstrous. The closer Kofi got to the city's center, the stronger the pull of the flame became. His arm burned intensely now, the mark glowing beneath his skin. It was as if the fire inside him and the blue inferno ahead were connected, feeding off each other in some twisted dance of fate. His breath came in ragged gusts, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and a low, rumbling growl echoed from deep within the earth. Buildings cracked and splintered as chunks of the street broke apart, falling into gaping chasms below. Kofi leapt to the side just as a massive piece of concrete crashed where he'd been standing a moment before. Ahead, the blue flame shot into the sky, twisting and writhing like a living thing. For a moment, it seemed to take shape, a massive, ghostly figure of smoke and fire, towering over the city. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, and its shadow seemed to reach for Kofi. His pulse raced. This wasn't just some abstract force anymore, it was alive. It was watching him. "You are the key," the flame's voice whispered in his mind, louder now, more insistent. "Come closer, Kofi. Join me, and your power will be limitless." Kofi's steps faltered. Part of him wanted to turn back, to run as far away from the flame as he could. But the other part, the part marked by the fire, felt drawn to it. The closer he got, the stronger the connection became, pulling him into its fiery grip. But then something caught his eye, a flicker of movement to his left. Kofi spun around, just in time to see a figure darting through the ruins, their silhouette illuminated by the blue light. It wasn't the shadowy figure from before, this person was different. Smaller. Quicker. Kofi squinted through the haze and realized with a start that it was the girl. The same girl he had saved earlier. But she was no longer trembling, no longer scared. Her eyes were now burning with the same blue light that radiated from the flame, and she moved with an unnatural speed, darting from shadow to shadow like a ghost. She stopped in front of him, her gaze locked on his. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was not her own, she spoke. "The city is ours now, Kofi," she said, her tone flat, emotionless. "Join us, or watch everything you love burn." Kofi stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't the girl he had saved. The flame had taken her, twisted her into something else, something dark and dangerous. He could see it in her eyes, the same flicker of madness, the same hunger that the flame exuded. "I won't let this happen," Kofi said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I'll stop you. I'll stop the flame." The girl smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was cold, lifeless. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The flame has chosen you. Either you become its master, or it will consume you." The city trembled as the girl stepped closer, her feet floating slightly above the ground, her eyes glowing brighter with each step. Kofi's heart raced, he was running out of time. He looked around desperately for any sign of help, but the streets were empty, swallowed by the mist. His mind raced. What could he do? He couldn't fight the flame, he had already seen its power, how it twisted everything it touched, how it consumed everything in its path. The girl was proof of that. But as Kofi's thoughts spiraled, something clicked in his mind. The map. It had led him here. It had brought him to the flame, but it had also hinted at something else, something deeper, hidden within the city itself. The map had shown more than just the flame's location, it had shown a way to control it. Suddenly, Kofi remembered the ancient symbol that had been etched into the corners of the map. It wasn't just decoration, it was a key. A key to unlocking something greater, something that could save the city. But where was it? Where was the key? Before he could figure it out, the girl lunged at him, her hands outstretched, her fingers crackling with blue energy. Kofi barely had time to react. He dodged to the side, feeling the sharp crackle of energy brush past his arm. The ground where he had been standing exploded, sending chunks of debris flying into the air. The girl's expression didn't change. She simply turned and came at him again, faster this time. Kofi ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding her strikes. But she was relentless, moving with an unnatural speed and grace that he couldn't match. Just as she was about to strike again, the ground shook violently, and a deep, guttural roar echoed through the city. Both Kofi and the girl froze, their attention snapping to the massive blue flame in the distance. The flame was changing. It was growing taller, brighter. The mist around it thickened, swelling faster and faster as the air grew heavy with the stench of smoke and ash. And from within the flame, Kofi could see something, a shape, a figure, forming out of the fire. It was as if the flame itself was being born. The girl smiled again, her eyes flashing with that eerie light. "It's too late now, Kofi. The flame is awake." Kofi's heart stopped. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. The moment the flame would fully come to life, and there would be no turning back. But even as the flame grew brighter, something deep inside Kofi refused to give in. He wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, Kofi turned and sprinted toward the city's center, toward the heart of the flame. Behind him, the girl screamed, her voice echoing through the empty streets, but he didn't look back. The flame was calling him, and he was running straight into the fire. As Kofi ran, the city seemed to melt around him. Buildings crumbled into dust, swallowed by the ever-growing mist. The sky was completely consumed by the blue flame, its tendrils stretching out across the heavens like the hands of a giant, reaching down to claim the earth. But Kofi kept moving, his eyes fixed on the center of the city where the massive pillar of flame roared. He didn't know how he was going to stop it, but he knew he had to try. The air crackled with energy as Kofi approached the heart of the blue flame. It loomed before him, a vortex of swirling fire and mist, pulsating with an insatiable hunger. He could feel the heat radiating from it, the blazing warmth that promised both destruction and power. The ground trembled beneath his feet, echoing the rhythm of his racing heart. Suddenly, the girl appeared again, her form flickering like a mirage. "You can't escape, Kofi. The flame knows your fears. It will use them against you." Kofi grit his teeth, pushing back the wave of doubt that threatened to engulf him. "I'm not afraid of you or the flame," he shouted, forcing himself to stand tall. But the truth was, he felt a deep-rooted terror bubbling just beneath the surface. What if the flame was right? What if he couldn't control it? As if sensing his hesitation, the blue flames surged higher, casting an eerie glow over the ruins of Kisa. The mist thickened, swirling around Kofi, whispering secrets that clawed at his mind. "You belong to the flame. Embrace your destiny." "No," Kofi shouted, clenching his fists. "I will find the key." With a sudden burst of determination, he pushed forward, diving into the heart of the flame. The heat enveloped him, but instead of burning, it filled him with energy. The world outside faded, then all he could see was the blinding blue light surrounding him. In that moment, he was no longer just a boy from Kisa, he was something more, an embodiment of the fire itself. Images flooded his mind, the history of the city, the power of the cult that once thrived in its shadows, and the ancient symbols etched in stone that contained the knowledge of generations. The flame began to whisper to him, its voice smooth and enticing. "You have the power, Kofi. You can wield it. You can become the master of this city." But just as quickly, the whispers turned sinister. "Or you can watch it all burn." Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and Kofi felt himself being pulled deeper into the flame. He resisted, anchoring himself to the ground, but the force was overwhelming. He could see shadows forming around him, flickering images of those he cared about, his family, his friends, all engulfed in flames. "No," he screamed, reaching out toward the shadows, desperate to save them. "I won't let this happen." In that moment of anguish, something inside him snapped. He realized that the key wasn't just about power, it was about love and sacrifice. The flame could not be controlled through fear or dominance, it had to be understood and respected. Kofi closed his eyes and reached deep within himself, connecting with the blue fire that had consumed him. He could feel the energy shifting, changing, responding to his thoughts and emotions. With a surge of will, he focused on the love he had for Kisa, the memories of laughter and joy that had once filled the streets. And then, with a force that shook the very foundations of the city, he shouted, "I reclaim this city. I will not be a slave to the flame." As Kofi's voice echoed through the heart of the flame, a wave of energy rippled outward, causing the blue fire to recoil momentarily. The shadows that had haunted him began to fade, replaced by flickers of light that danced through the mist. Kofi felt a surge of warmth wash over him, and in that instant, he knew he had taken a stand against the darkness. The girl, still tethered to the flame, watched in disbelief as the light grew brighter, illuminating the entire area. "You can't fight it," she screamed, her voice breaking. "It will consume you." But Kofi stood firm, his resolve unyielding. "I'm not fighting it, I'm transforming it." The energy swirled around him, and the blue flames responded to his determination. They began to shift, changing from a menacing glow to a more vibrant hue, a blend of blue and gold. The mist that had once suffocated the city transformed into a gentle breeze, lifting the weight of despair. Kofi felt the connection between himself and the flame deepening. Memories of Kisa flooded his mind, children playing in the streets, families gathering to share meals, the laughter that once filled the air. Those memories fueled his resolve, and he knew he was on the brink of something powerful. But just as he began to feel a sense of triumph, the shadows returned, darker and more menacing than before. The figure cloaked in darkness materialized once again, its eyes burning with fury. "You think you can change it? You are nothing but a pawn in this game, Kofi." Kofi's heart raced as he faced the figure. "I am more than a pawn. I will free this city from your grip." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the air. "You think love can conquer the flame? You will learn the hard way that the flame demands a greater price." With that, the figure lunged toward him, shadow swirling like a storm. Kofi braced himself, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. But instead of fear, he felt a wave of calm wash over him. He raised his hands, channeling the energy of the flame, and focused on the love he had for his city. The shadows collided with the light, and a blinding flash erupted between them. The force was immense, causing the ground to tremble and crack. Kofi stood firm, grounding himself in the midst of the chaos. He knew he was close to taking control of the flame and transforming it into something beautiful. But the figure didn't relent. It roared in fury, and the shadows coiled tighter around Kofi, threatening to pull him into their abyss. The air grew thick with tension, and Kofi could feel himself being drawn toward the darkness. In that moment of desperation, he remembered the symbols from the map. They held the key to the flame's true power. With all his might, he summoned the energy within him and shouted, "I release you from the shadows." Kofi could feel himself being drawn toward the darkness. With all his might, he summoned the energy within him. Does it work? Join us in the next episode to find out.